The biting New York wind whipped down Mott Street, scattering discarded newspapers and chilling everyone to the bone. But the cold didn't seem to bother Frank Martin, a name he used now. A lifetime removed from his previous identities, that he moved with a quiet purpose, his gaze sharp, scanning the environment with a trained eye. The scars on his knuckles, hidden beneath worn leather gloves, hinted at a past he tried to bury. He was no longer a soldier, no longer a specialist. Now, he was just a man trying to live a quiet life, a life of routine and anonymity. He lived in a sparsely furnished apartment above a dim sum restaurant. The smells of ginger and soy a constant reminder of his new, albeit fragile, peace. Today's routine involved a trip to the local hardware store. But as he rounded the corner, he saw it, a group of teenagers harassing an elderly woman, attempting to snatch her purse. Most would have walked on, averted their gaze, but Frank Martin wasn't most people. Without a word, he intervened. A swift maneuver disarmed the first teenager. A well-placed kick sent another sprawling. The remaining two hesitated, recognizing the deadly calm in his eyes. "Leave her alone," he growled, his voice a low rumble. They scattered like rats, disappearing into the crowded street. The elderly woman, shaken but unharmed, thanked him profusely in Cantonese. He simply nodded, retrieved her purse, and handed it back. "Be careful," he said, his voice softening slightly as he continued on his way. He couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile peace was about to be shattered. The ghosts of his past were stirring. The scent of jasmine tea and calligraphy ink hung heavy in the air of the small Chinatown apartment. This was May's world, a vibrant contrast to the gritty streets outside. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing above her drawing table. 87 years old, May possessed an artistic talent that belied her age. Her drawings, filled with fantastical creatures and vibrant landscapes, were a window into her boundless imagination. She lived with her parents, Li Wei and Lin Mei, in a cramped but cozy apartment above a bustling noodle shop. Her father worked tirelessly as a delivery driver, while her mother was a seamstress, her nimble fingers creating intricate designs on silk garments. They were a close-knit family, their lives centered around May's happiness and well-being. Today, May was drawing a dragon, its scales shimmering with iridescent colors. She hummed a soft melody as she carefully added details, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her mother watched her from across the room, a warm smile gracing her lips. "May, you are so talented," she said in Mandarin. "Your drawings are like stories." May giggled, her eyes sparkling. "This dragon is protecting our family," she replied, holding up the drawing. "He keeps the bad guys away." Little did she know, the bad guys were already lurking in the shadows, their presence a dark cloud gathering over her innocent world. The dragon in her drawing, however powerful, would need a real protector soon, a protector like Frank Martin, though she didn't yet know his name, nor the role he was about to play in her life. The contrast between her innocent world and the danger approaching was about to become starkly apparent. The Dragon Tattoo Parlor, tucked away on a side street in Brighton Beach, served as a front for something far more sinister. Behind the neon glow of the dragon's eyes, the Bratva conducted their business. Dmitry Volkov, the Pakhon, the boss, surveyed his domain with cold, calculating eyes. He was a man carved from granite, his face a roadmap of past violence, his presence radiating menace. His empire was built on fear and intimidation. Extortion, drug trafficking, and human smuggling were their bread and butter. They operated with impunity, their reach extending into the highest levels of the city's underbelly. Now, they had set their sights on Li Wei, desperate to expand his delivery business, had borrowed a substantial sum from Volkov, a decision he now bitterly regretted. The interest rates were exorbitant, the repayment terms impossible. He was trapped in a web of debt, and Volkov was ready to collect. "He's late again," Volkov growled, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down the spines of his lieutenants. "Send a message. A reminder of what happens when you disrespect the Bratva." His lieutenant, a hulking brute named Boris, nodded grimly. "What kind of message, Dmitri?" Volkov smiled, a chilling display of teeth. "A personal one. Something he values. Something. Irreplaceable." He paused, his gaze hardening. His daughter. The order hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. The shadow over May's innocent world had just deepened, and the storm was about to break. Frank Martin, unaware of the events unfolding, was about to be drawn into a conflict far bigger than he could have imagined. The delivery van screeched to a halt outside the noodle shop. Li, his face etched with worry, jumped out. Clutching a wad of cash. He was late, desperately trying to scrape together enough to appease Volkov, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Boris and two other hulking figures emerged from the van, their faces grim. "Where's the rest of the money, Liwei?" Boris demanded, his voice like gravel. Liwei stammered, I need more time. I'll get it, I promise." Boris sneered. "Promises are worthless. Volkov wants his money now." He nodded to his men. "Take the girl." Lin Mei, who had been watching from the window, screamed as the men burst into the apartment. Mei, startled, dropped her drawing and ran to her mother. The men grabbed her, ignoring Lin Mei's desperate pleas. "No, please, take me instead." Lin Mei cried, clinging to her daughter. Boris shoved her aside. "Volkov wants the girl. You should have thought of that before your husband got into debt." They dragged Mei kicking and screaming towards the van. Liwei, paralyzed by fear and guilt, could only watch in horror as his daughter was snatched away. Lin Mei collapsed on the sidewalk, her sobs echoing through the crowded street. The dragon in Mei's drawing couldn't protect her now. Only a real hero could save her, and time was running out. The quiet life Frank Martin craved was about to be shattered, replaced by a desperate race against the clock. Lin Mei, consumed by grief and desperation, remembered the incident a few weeks prior. The mugging Frank Martin had stopped. She hadn't understood his words, but she'd seen the controlled power, the lethal grace in his movements. She'd overheard whispers in the neighborhood. Rumors of a man with a dangerous past, a man who could handle problems others couldn't. It was a long shot, but she had nothing to lose. She raced through the streets, her heart pounding, her sobs barely audible above the city's cacophony. She finally found the hardware store, the bell above the door jingling as she entered. Frank Martin was at the counter, paying for his purchases. She rushed towards him, her voice trembling. "Please, you must help me. My daughter. They took her." Frank Martin, his face impassive, initially ignored her. He paid for his items and turned to leave. Lin Mei grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, they were Russian men. They took my Mei. You have to help me." He stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly. He recognized the raw terror in her eyes, the desperation that mirrored a pain he knew all too well, but he had walked away from that life. He couldn't get involved. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cold. "I can't help you." He gently disengaged her grip and walked out of the store, leaving Lin Mei heartbroken and alone. He told himself it was for the best, that getting involved would only lead to more pain, but the image of Mei's terrified face and her mother's desperate plea burned in his mind. The image wouldn't leave him. Mei's wide, terrified eyes, Lin Mei's desperate plea, they echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of his past failures. He tried to ignore it, to focus on the mundane tasks of his day, but the feeling gnawed at him, a cold knot in his stomach. He found himself staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, the lines on his face deeper, the scars more prominent. He saw the ghost of a man he used to be. A man who had made a promise he couldn't keep. Flashback a dusty road in a war-torn country. A young girl, no older than Mei, clinging to his leg, begging him to save her family. He had promised he would. But he was too late. A roadside bomb, a blinding flash, and then, nothing. Only the screams, the dust, and the unbearable weight of his failure. He slammed his fist against the sink, the porcelain cracking under the impact. He couldn't save her then, but maybe, just maybe, he could save Mei. He couldn't let another innocent child suffer because of his inaction. He knew the risks. He knew getting involved meant opening a Pandora's box of violence and pain, but he couldn't turn his back. He had to try. He owed it to Mei. To Lin Mei and to the ghost of the little girl he couldn't save. The decision was made. He was going to help. The quiet life was over. Frank Martin was back. The transformation was immediate. The quiet, unassuming Frank Martin vanished, replaced by the focused, calculating operative he once was. He started with information. He needed to know everything about the Bratva's operation in New York. He visited an old contact, a grizzled informant named Benny the Nose, who frequented a dimly lit bar in Little Italy. Benny owed Frank a favor, a debt incurred years ago. "The Bratva, huh?" Benny rasped, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "They're bad news, Frank. Real bad. Volkov runs a tight ship. Extortion, drugs, women, you name it, they're into it." Frank leaned in, his voice low. "I need to know their operation." Hideouts, contacts, anything. Benny hesitated. This is dangerous territory, Frank. You sure you want to get involved? I don't have a choice, Frank replied, his eyes hardening. Benny sighed. Relenting, he revealed the Bratva's known hangouts. A gambling den in Brighton Beach, a warehouse in Red Hook, and the Dragon Tattoo Parlor. He also provided names, key lieutenants, enforcers, and corrupt officials on their payroll. Armed with this information, Frank began to piece together the puzzle. He spent hours studying maps, cross-referencing information, and formulating a plan he needed to find May. And he needed to do it fast. Time was running out, and he knew Volkov wouldn't hesitate to use her. The game had begun. The Brighton Beach gambling den throbbed with noise and smoke. Men huddled around poker tables, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. Frank, disguised in a nondescript suit and a carefully cultivated air of disinterest, blended seamlessly into the crowd. He moved with a purpose, his senses heightened, scanning the room for any sign of May or any clue to her whereabouts. He observed the layout, noting the security cameras, the exits, and the burly men guarding the back room. He knew he couldn't just walk in and ask questions. He needed to create a diversion, to draw out information without raising suspicion. He approached a poker table, casually placing a stack of bills on the felt. He played aggressively, winning a few hands, losing a few, attracting attention without appearing too skilled. Soon, he was engaged in a heated conversation with a loudmouthed Russian man who boasted of his connections to the Bratva. Volkov's a powerful man. The Russian slurred, his breath reeking of vodka. You don't want to cross him. Frank chuckled, feigning ignorance. Volkov? Never heard of him. What's he into? The Russian leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Everything. And he doesn't like people asking questions. That was all Frank needed. He excused himself from the table, heading towards the back room. He knew he was walking into a trap, but he had no choice. He had to find May. The moment Frank stepped into the back room, the atmosphere shifted. 2 guards, their faces like stone, blocked his path. This is a restricted area. One of them growled in Russian. Frank simply smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. I'm looking for someone. The guards lunged, but Frank was faster. A swift kick to the groin incapacitated one, while a precise chop to the neck dropped the other like a sack of potatoes. He moved through the room like a ghost, taking down guards with brutal efficiency. He didn't kill them, but he left them in no condition to continue the fight. The back room was a hive of illicit activity, gambling, drug dealing, and money laundering. Frank ignored it all. Focusing on his objective, he systematically searched the room, overturning tables, rifling through files, and interrogating anyone who dared to stand in his way. He found a ledger detailing the Bratva's operations, including a list of names and locations. 1 entry caught his eye. Red Hook Warehouse, Special Cargo. It was followed by a date and time, coinciding with May's abduction. He had his lead as he prepared to leave. The room erupted in chaos. More guards poured in, alerted by the commotion. Frank fought his way out, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in his wake. He had the information he needed. The next stop was Red Hook. He was one step closer to finding May. The Red Hook warehouse was a cold, cavernous space, filled with the stench of damp concrete and diesel fumes. May was locked in a small, sparsely furnished room. A single barred window offered a glimpse of the grimy cityscape, but it was too high for her to reach. Despite her fear, May refused to succumb to despair. She remembered her mother's words. Be strong, May, always be strong. She examined her surroundings, searching for anything she could use to her advantage. She found a loose floorboard and managed to pry it up, revealing a small cavity beneath. She used a shard of broken glass to carve a message into the wood. Help, May, Chinatown. She carefully replaced the floorboard, hoping someone would find it. She also began to observe her captors. They were gruff and intimidating, but she noticed they were careless, often leaving the door unlocked for short periods. She started to plan an escape, memorizing the layout of the warehouse, noting the security measures, and identifying potential escape routes. 1 day, while the guard was distracted, she managed to slip out of her room. She crept through the warehouse, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw crates filled with illegal goods, men arguing in Russian, and the constant comings and goings of trucks. She was a small fish in a dangerous ocean, but she refused to give up. She would find a way to escape. She had to. Boris entered May's room, his face devoid of emotion. He wasn't there to hurt her physically. Volkov had a different plan. He wanted to break her spirit, to use her fear to control her father. He had sent in Victor, the Bratva's interrogator, a master of psychological manipulation. Victor was a gaunt, wiry man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. He spoke softly, his voice almost hypnotic, but his words were like poison. He knew how to exploit vulnerabilities, how to instill fear and doubt. He sat down across from May, offering her a piece of candy. "Hello, May," he said, his voice gentle. "My name is Victor. I just want to talk." May remained silent, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't trust him. Victor smiled. "Your father owes Mr. Volkov a lot of money," he continued. "He's not a very responsible man, is he? He's put you in a very difficult situation." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Perhaps you know where he's hiding the money? Maybe he told you something, a secret place." May shook her head. She knew nothing about her father's debts. Victor sighed. "That's a shame, because Mr. Volkov is a very impatient man, and when he doesn't get what he wants, bad things happen, very bad things." He left the candy on the table, a silent threat hanging in the air. He was playing a long game, slowly chipping away at her resolve. He wanted to break her, not with violence, but with fear. Frank arrived at the Red Hook warehouse under the cover of darkness. He had spent hours studying the blueprints, memorizing the layout, and identifying the security vulnerabilities. He knew he was walking into a hornet's nest, but he was prepared. He parked his car a block away, silently approaching the warehouse. On foot, he scaled the fence, disabling the alarm system with practiced ease. He moved like a shadow, his senses alert, his movements precise and deadly. He took out the first guard with a silenced pistol, a single shot to the head. He moved inside, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with confidence. He disabled security cameras, bypassed motion sensors, and systematically eliminated any resistance he encountered. The warehouse was heavily guarded, but Frank was a force of nature. He used his skills in hand-to-hand combat, his knowledge of weapons, and his tactical expertise to overcome the odds. He was a one-man army tearing through the Bratva's defenses. He knew May was inside, and that knowledge fueled his determination. He would stop at nothing to rescue her. The assault had begun. The warehouse transformed into a brutal arena. Every corridor, every room became a battleground. Bratva thugs, armed with knives, pipes, and whatever else they could find, swarmed Frank, but they were no match for his skills. He moved with a blur of motion, his fists and feet a whirlwind of destruction. A knife-wielding thug charged. Frank disarmed him with a lightning-fast maneuver and used the same knife to incapacitate another attacker. A pipe-swinging brute came at him. Frank dodged the blow and delivered a crippling blow to the man's knee. He used the environment to his advantage, smashing heads against walls, using crates as cover, and turning their own weapons against them. His movements were economical, efficient, and deadly. He didn't waste any energy. Every strike was precise, every blow calculated to inflict maximum damage. The fight choreography was intense and visceral. Close-ups highlighted the sweat on Frank's brow, the grim determination in his eyes, and the brutal impact of his strikes. The sounds of bone crunching, metal clanging, and men groaning filled the air. He wasn't just fighting. He was surviving. He was driven by a single purpose, to rescue May. And nothing was going to stand in his way. Frank burst into the room just as Victor was leaning in, his voice a silken whisper of menace. May was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with fear, but a spark of defiance still flickered within them. Victor whirled around, a look of surprise quickly replaced by cold calculation. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You've made a mistake." Frank ignored him, his focus solely on May. He knelt down beside her, his voice gentle. "Are you okay?" May nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He was scaring me." Frank's eyes hardened. He turned to Victor, his voice a low growl. "Get out." Victor smirked. "This isn't over." He turned and walked away, leaving Frank alone with May. Frank gently helped her to her feet. He wrapped his arm around her, offering her comfort and reassurance. "It's okay," he said. "I'm here now. You're safe." May clung to him, burying her face in his chest. She was trembling, but she was safe. For the first time since her abduction, she felt a glimmer of hope. In that brief, tender moment, a connection was formed. Frank saw in May the innocence he had failed to protect in the past. He would not fail her again. He would get her out of this alive, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Volkov was still out there, And he wouldn't give up so easily. As Frank led May through the warehouse, an ominous silence descended. The sounds of fighting had ceased, replaced by an unsettling calm. He knew Volkov was close. He could feel his presence, a dark shadow looming over them. Suddenly, Volkov emerged from the shadows, flanked by two heavily armed bodyguards. He was holding a gun, his face a mask of fury. "You shouldn't have interfered," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "This was business. You made it personal." Frank stopped, shielding May behind him. "Let her go, Volkov. This doesn't have to end this way." Volkov laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "It already has. You took something that belonged to me. Now you're going to pay." He raised his gun, aiming at Frank. "Don't!" May cried, grabbing Frank's arm. Volkov hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't want to hurt the girl, but he wouldn't let her go. She was his leverage, his insurance. Frank seized the opportunity. He shoved May behind a stack of crates and drew his own weapon. "This ends now, Volkov." The standoff began. The air crackled with tension. The final showdown was about to commence. The warehouse became a battleground once more, but this time it was a personal duel. Volkov, enraged and desperate, unleashed a hail of bullets. Frank, using his tactical skills, dodged and weaved, seeking cover behind the crates. He knew he couldn't win a straight gunfight. He had to use his wits, his agility, and his knowledge of the environment to his advantage. He disarmed one of Volkov's bodyguards with a well-aimed shot, then used the man as a human shield to draw Volkov's fire. He engaged Volkov in hand-to-hand combat. A brutal and visceral struggle. They traded blows, each strike fueled by rage and determination. Volkov was a powerful man, but Frank was faster, more skilled, and more determined. He used his knowledge of pressure points to weaken Volkov, disabling him with a series of precise strikes. He exploited Volkov's anger, turning his rage against him. The fight culminated in a final devastating blow. Frank disarmed Volkov and delivered a crushing uppercut, sending him sprawling to the ground. Volkov was defeated, his reign of terror brought to an end. The warehouse fell silent once more. The only sound the ragged breathing of Frank Martin. He had won. Frank stood over Volkov, his face grim. He could have ended it there, a quick and decisive move that would ensure Volkov could never harm anyone again. But he hesitated. He wasn't a killer, not anymore. He made a call, using a burner phone. He contacted his old CIA contact, a woman named Sarah who still owed him a few favors. He gave her the location of the warehouse and Volkov's name. "He's all yours," Frank said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He's wanted for a long list of crimes. You can take it from here." Sarah didn't ask any questions. She knew Frank. She knew he wouldn't get involved unless it was absolutely necessary. She also knew he wouldn't kill unless he had no other choice. "Consider it done," she replied. "And Frank, thanks." He hung up the phone, erasing the call history. He had done what he could. He had saved May, and he had ensured Volkov would face justice. He had chosen the path of redemption, not revenge. He left Volkov for the authorities, knowing he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was the right one. He had broken the cycle of violence, at least for now. The reunion was tearful and joyous. Frank drove May back to Chinatown, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows. When they arrived at her apartment, Lin May and Li Wei were waiting anxiously outside, their faces etched with worry. As May ran into her mother's arms, the pent-up emotions of the past few days poured out. Tears of relief flowed freely as the family embraced, their bond stronger than ever. Li Wei approached Frank, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved my daughter. I don't know how to repay you." Frank simply nodded, a rare smile gracing his lips. "Just take care of her," he said. "That's all the repayment I need." As he watched the family embrace, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had atoned for his past failures. He had saved an innocent child, and in doing so, he had saved himself. The ghosts of his past were finally silent. He had found a measure of redemption, a reason to believe in the possibility of good in a world filled with darkness. He turned to leave, disappearing back into the night. His work there was done. Weeks later, Frank was back in his routine, walking the streets of New York City. He still lived in the same apartment above the dim sum restaurant, the familiar smells a comforting constant. But something had changed. The darkness that had haunted him for so long had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose. He saw May and her parents occasionally, their faces beaming with happiness. Li Wei had paid off his debt, and the family was thriving. They would wave and smile, a silent acknowledgement of the debt they owed him. He continued to observe, to protect, to be a silent guardian watching over the innocent. He stopped a few more muggings, intervened in a few more altercations, always careful to avoid unnecessary violence. One evening, as he walked past a playground, he saw a group of teenagers bullying a younger child that he hesitated for a moment, remembering his vow to stay out of trouble. But then he saw the fear in the child's eyes, the same fear he had seen in May's eyes, that he sighed. A faint smile playing on his lips, he couldn't turn his back. Not anymore. That he walked towards the playground, his steps purposeful, his gaze unwavering. Frank Martin was back, not as a soldier, not as a specialist, but as a protector. The city needed him, and he was ready to answer the call. The camera pans up to the New York skyline, hinting at other dangers lurking in the shadows, and Frank Martin ready to face them.